Hi everyone, it's a pleasure to be invited to present alongside such inspiring scientists in this session. I'm going to talk about my pilot outreach project, Science Travels, aimed at engaging Gypsy traveller, Roma, Showman and boater communities in STEM subjects. For those of you who may have difficulty with screens, I'm 1.53 metres tall, I have brownish reddish hair, hazel eyes. I'm a Romany woman with a BSc in biochemistry, and I'm a technician in the physiology teaching labs at the University of Glasgow. I'm also the lead on Science Travels. When I was thinking about what to say today, I referred back to the session title, Thinking Outside the Box, and I realised how fitting the idea of boxes and labels is to the development of Science Travels. Often, members of GT-RSB communities are popped in a box and labelled by the rest of society. We're troublemakers, we're lawbreakers, we're tax evaders, we're going to pull our caravans on the green and make a mess. However, our children can also be considered difficult at school. They seem to have low educational aspirations. They're often bullied by their peers and they spend a lot of their time being worried about being excluded from school. Our lifestyles are considered odd. Our cultures ridiculed or even demonised in mainstream media. Indeed, earlier this year, Matthew Paris in the Times said that we were a doomed mindset that needed purging from society and that we should never have been given ethnic minority status. Just prior to the first lockdown in 2020, my mum and dad got broadband for the first time. Ironically, it was in the hope that it would encourage more visits from their grandchildren. But as they got more savvy with the tech, we regularly meet up via video call for a cup or three of tea, maybe six, and a chat. Our chats often turned to education as the grandkids were experiencing online lessons for the first time, and my parents marvelled at the contrast between the lessons they'd had as children and those of the youngest family members today. But as the pandemic marched on, our conversations moved from the lessons themselves to the experience of being at school as a member of a travelling community. And here it became evident that despite almost 60 years passing, the experience of my parents and their grandchildren were eerily similar and almost at odds with my own travels through education. Whereas I had felt included and encouraged by my teachers and my peers, they were bullied or othered for being a traveller. Verbal and physical attack were and are not unusual. And whilst being Gypsy, Roma or traveller is a protected characteristic, there's little appetite to approach bullying on the grounds of being Gypsy, traveller or Roma as racially motivated. So what was going on? I started to investigate online and via Twitter, as we all do, and what I found genuinely shocked me. Now I know here there should be a slide with some stats and stuff, but maybe just hearing the words might have more impact. GRT children have the worst educational outcomes of any ethnic minority in the UK at every key stage. Indeed, white working class males, who are traditionally seen as the group which performs worst in education, actually achieve much better outcomes than we do. GRT children are more likely to be excluded from school than their settled peers, and many GRT children end up being home educated. This may be because parents fear for their child's safety at school, or maybe they feel that they want to protect their cultural heritage. GRT children often don't successfully navigate the transition from primary to secondary education, and even fewer move on to further or higher education. But we all know that poor educational outcomes lead to other inequalities. GRT community members are likely to die 10 years before members of other communities. we are more likely to suffer a chronic health condition. And unfortunately, we are significantly more likely to commit suicide. If you're travelling, it can be difficult to access health services, educational services, and if you don't travel, maybe you didn't complete your schooling and you can't understand the letter that tells you when your appointment is. But to be fair, not everything was so depressing. There are GRT activists and human rights organisations out there promoting education, challenging stereotypes, calling out racism, and working towards equality for GRT community members. I discovered that during lockdown, King's College London developed an online tutoring scheme for GRT children. And here in Glasgow, Romano, a charity for Roma rights, provided IT resources to local Roma children to tackle digital exclusion, enabling them to participate in online lessons. More importantly, in every project aimed at supporting Gypsy, Traveller and Roma communities, at least one member of those communities was at the heart of this discussion. Through networking on Twitter, I came across the GTRSB into Higher Education pledge, an example of activism in action driven by Sherry Smith, herself a Romany Gypsy, and Dr. Margaret Greenfield at Buckinghamshire New University. The pledge seeks to support members of not only Gypsy, Traveller and Roma communities, but also Showman and Boater communities. The 5 groups are distinct, but we share some commonalities in culture, including nomadicism, centrality of family, and children learning their trade by shadowing other members of the family. But we all know the strength in numbers, right? 5 groups is more vocal than 3. The pledge is an important part of bringing groups together to demand equality in access to education and beyond. But here I think it would be important to note that although the 2011 census states that 63,000 people identified as Gypsy or Traveller, the number could be as many as 300,000. Many Gypsies, and I am one amongst them, don't identify as such for fear of making their lives difficult. There I should state, I didn't identify until recently. In actual fact, I only identified as a result of the big fat Gypsy wedding turning up on TV and everyone standing around the water cooler at work that day going, "Did you see that? Da-da-da, da-da-da." I was like, hello. It's really not like that for everybody. And I think this understanding that what we see is not necessarily a true reflection of everyone's lived experience is really important in this idea of including everybody in STEM. And that doesn't matter what background you are from. So, I had a tiny little bit of a light bulb moment. The idea that I had rattling around in the back of my head for ages, you have a STEM outreach project with Romany kids, could maybe be something much more useful. You could now encourage Gypsy, Traveller, Roma and Showman and Boater kids to engage with STEM. And if kids decide that science isn't their thing, heaven forbid, but there you go, if there's another discipline they want to study and maybe we can help them find out about how to do that, then surely that encourages everybody to take part. So, here's a tweet I found on that there Twitter. A toy is a toy, a game is a game, but a box can be anything you want it to be. We as GTRSB individuals can take our boxes and reimagine them. If we have enough support, we can re-engineer them. But we need other communities to take the boxes they put us in and do the same. So, Science Travels has a few aims. as I said before, primarily engage RSB children in STEM, get them engaged in science and get them to enjoy it. However, unfortunately, not every kid sees science as the thing that they find most interesting. So let's hook them in. You weren't so engaged with the science, is there something else you want to learn about? Let's hook them in and get them engaged in their education. As a group of communities, we need role models. We need people to identify and say, I work here, I do this is amazing, in science or out with. The vast majority of people who are GTRSB do not identify for fear of making their lives difficult, particularly their working lives. And so if we don't provide enough opportunities for people to role model in a safe environment, we're never going to see the true number of GTRSP people that are involved in the most important parts of our society. I also truly believe in engagement without othering. And this has nothing to do with whether or not it's science travels. Literally, we have to engage everybody. We don't other everybody, but what we do is talk about the major contributions that people have made to the session. So for science travels, it'll be like the contribution that GTRSB individuals have made to that session. But surely, with all engagement, we should be vocalising the contributions that everyone makes to that session. I also believe that blended delivery, particularly for science travels, is really important. We need to think about the activity itself. We need to think about, can it be replicated at home, in a school? If somebody's travelling, does it cost? Is something that we're asking them to provide prohibitive? If we can't deliver an equitable educational experience for all children involved, regardless of background, but also, you know, things should not cost a fortune. We should be making sure that everybody can contribute or take part, regardless of, you know, where they are on the socio-economical scale. And so we need to think about how we deliver, what the materials cost, and also whether we can make those materials open access. Make sure that everybody, no matter what their background, can access these materials. But regardless of what my massive aims are for science travels, if we aren't engaging the kids and if they're not having fun, then we're obviously doing something completely wrong. So I knew I would need a team of people that would be able to support a technician who unusually is leading a project of this type. Someone, you know, who would need a little bit of advice on educational theory, maybe a few ideas about, you know, how we could assess impact, or also, in the case of Claire Dickerson, somebody who could point me in the direction of actual scientific educational standards for children in England. So, got my little team. I've been very lucky in my career to engage with some really incredible academics who can, you know, basically cover everything that needed to be sorted for science travels. But also we needed a few younger scientists, a few scientists that we could engage with the idea that you could effect social change as an undergraduate from the University of Glasgow whilst being part of science travels. So I have my 3 project students in the middle there with their unfastened lab coats, but also a group of academics from professor to lecturer who gave us our time, who sat and listened to my lived experience, and who actually thought that maybe this actually could contribute to the greater scientific good. Through this support and this understanding, we have secured funding from the Physiological Society for our pilot project, but also some funding from the University of Glasgow Chancellor's Fund, who are enabling us to not only give this a Glasgow bent further forward, but also enable us to reach further afield. If the University of Glasgow has worldwide accessibility, surely Science Travels will on the back of that. So to impact, we are a collaborative group of scientists, old and new. And that's really important because everybody's listened and everybody is engaged with the idea of thinking about groups that they wouldn't have thought about with their engagement activities. We are beta testing our first materials, that's ongoing, don't know how that's working yet. But we've also opened discussion on the GTRSB into Higher Education pledge with the university. Maybe we'll sign, and hopefully we will, but that's a step, and it's an engagement that we wouldn't have had if we didn't have this project. We've also had discussions on inclusive learning materials with other groups within the university and also outside the university. I was invited to write a blog for the Physiological Society, and today's presentation actually means that I'm still talking to more people than I would have done without this project. I'm also networking through social media, and those networks are completely ongoing. I should have probably called this a rally cry, but I called it Call to Arms. And this reflects the idea of boxes. Take me and take my nibblings out of their boxes. Make it so that there has been social change between my parents going to school and their grandchildren go to school. Make a social difference with your decisions about your outreach projects, about your EDI policies, about whether or not you include GTRSB voices in your inclusion policies. Every single one of us, no matter what a role within a university or an institution, wears several hats a day. All of them involve inclusivity. If you really want to be inclusive, you bring 5 more chairs to your table to talk about your policies. A gypsy, a Roma, a traveller, a showman, a boater. Bring 5 groups to your table. Then you truly hear all the voices you should be listening to. Twitter was massively instrumental in making Science Travels an actual thing. Therefore, I really do want to promote my own Twitter account, GTRSB in STEM, which will detail things about Science Travels, but also more widely about GTRSB individuals in STEM. Also want to highlight GTRSB into Higher Ed, which you should follow if you feel your institution should be part of the pledge, but also to find out what the conversation is around the things you need to do to support GTRSB individuals in their higher education journey. The Traveller Movement and Friends Family Travellers are the next 2. They are massive groups that really do advocate for GTRSB inclusion within the wider community, and something that you really should follow if you have any interest in making sure that GTRSB voices are heard. Samantha Heeson, a lady showman who has put together the most amazing Wakelet resource on everything GTRSB in support of the GTRSB into Higher Education pledge, but also standalone. It's just a really amazing resource for anybody who doesn't know anything about GTRSB communities, or even people who just want to find out more. Future for Fairs, a group of lady showmen who have come together to highlight the importance of recognition for showmen, even though they're not part of any recognised ethnic group currently. Also, I'd like to highlight Professor Colin Clark, a Professor of Romany Studies at the University of the West of Scotland, who also is a great dude, listens to loads of records, has an amazing Twitter feed, but also was, for me, really positive in this idea that we can affect social change from just talking about the things that we do all the time. Thank you for listening to my presentation.